Today, we're going to talk about one of the most fundamental questions of what it means to be human. What is motivation? What's that spark, that internal fire that gets us to do, well, anything at all? From dragging yourself out of bed in the morning to performing acts of survival that seem almost superhuman. And to really understand that power, we have to start with a truly extreme story. I know, that sounds like something ripped straight out of a horror film, doesn't it? But it's a true story, and it's the unbelievable climax of one man's fight for his own life. And it shows us just how raw and almost scary the power of motivation can be. I want you to try and picture this for a second. You are totally, completely alone. Nobody on earth knows where you are. And for 5 agonizing days, climber Aron Ralston was pinned by an 800-pound boulder. He had basically no food, a tiny bit of water, and zero way to call for help. The situation wasn't just desperate, it was hopeless. So what flipped the switch? I mean, after days of chipping away at this massive rock, delirious and on the verge of death, he had this incredibly vivid dream of a little boy who he knew was his future son. And that one vision, that single thought, was the turning point. It's like it tapped into our most powerful psychological forces, those primal needs like hunger and thirst, and that deep social need to belong to a family. It gave him the will to do the absolutely unthinkable. And that, right there, is what we're talking about today. Motivation is just that, a need or a desire that gets you to do something. It's why Aron Ralston could do what he did, but it's also the exact same reason you decide to cook dinner instead of ordering takeout or study for a test. It's operating on every level of our lives all the time. So that brings us right to the core mystery, doesn't it? What's really going on under the hood? What are the actual mechanics of motivation? I mean, why do we even have these drives in the first place? Well, psychologists have been wrestling with this question for more than a century, and they've come up with some pretty cool answers. We're going to dive into 4 of the biggest psychological theories that try to explain what drives us. Now listen, none of them is the perfect single answer, but when you put them all together, they give us a really, really powerful way to understand what gets us going. So here's the game plan. We've kind of already touched on the evolutionary perspective, right? The idea that instincts for survival and belonging are just hardwired into us. Then we'll look at drive reduction theory, which is all about balancing our basic needs. After that, optimal arousal theory, which explains why we sometimes get bored and seek out excitement. And finally, we'll get to the big one, Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs. All right, so first up is drive reduction theory. The easiest way to think about this is to imagine yourself as a human thermostat. A physical need like hunger creates this uncomfortable state, a drive, and that drive pushes you to do something, like eat, to get rid of the discomfort and return to a nice, balanced state called homeostasis. It's a simple idea, right? But it's a little too simple. It can't explain why we sometimes ignore our drives, like when people fast, or why we do things when there's no drive at all, like eating a whole bag of chips just because we're bored. Clearly, there's more to do it. So if it's not just about getting back to a neutral, balanced state, what else is going on? Well, that's where optimal arousal theory comes in. This idea suggests that we're all looking for a just right level of stimulation. We don't want to be bored, but we don't want to be super stressed out either. We're looking for that sweet spot. So if you're bored, you might call a friend. If you're stressed, you might want to read a book. For an adrenaline junkie like Aron Ralston, that sweet spot is obviously sky high. For others, it might be a lot lower. And finally, we get to the one you've probably heard of, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He kind of put all these ideas together and argued that our motivations are stacked in a pyramid. At the very bottom, you've got your most basic physiological needs, food, water, air. You have to take care of those before you can even think about the next level up, which is safety. And only once you feel safe can you work your way up to belonging and love, then esteem, and finally, at the very top, self-actualization, which is just a fancy way of saying, reaching your absolute full potential. The key here? You gotta build the foundation first. To really get a gut-level feeling for how powerful these theories are, let's zoom in on just one of those needs, the one right at the very bottom of that pyramid, hunger. Because, as a really famous experiment showed us, hunger isn't just a feeling in your stomach. It's a psychological force so strong, it can literally change who you are.
So to understand this, we have to go back to World War II, to a famous and, let's be honest, ethically pretty dicey experiment called the Minnesota Hunger Experiment. In 1944, 36 men volunteered to be systematically starved. Why? Well, researchers wanted to understand the devastating famines that were sweeping across Europe.
For 6 straight months, the men's food intake was cut in half. Just gone. I want you to really think about that. Everything you normally eat in a day, imagine half of it just disappears. This wasn't a diet. It was a simulation of famine. And the goal here was absolutely brutal. Each one of those men was supposed to lose a quarter of his entire body weight. And get this, on top of the starvation, they were forced to work 40 hours a week, and that included walking 22 miles. The physical strain was just off the charts. But the psychological effects, they were so much worse. The mental toll was staggering. These guys became completely obsessed with food. It was all they talked about, all they dreamed about. They'd read cookbooks for fun. They completely lost interest in sex, in socializing, even in humor. They became irritable, anxious, and deeply depressed. A single, frustrated need, hunger, had completely hijacked their entire personalities. And notice that last point. They isolated themselves. That is a huge clue. That social withdrawal, that isolation, it shows you how all of our needs are so deeply connected. You mess with a basic physical need like hunger, and bam, the social needs start to crumble too. And that brings us to our next massive motivator, that deep, fundamentally human need to belong. At our core, we are social animals. It's not just a nice to have, it's a survival strategy. From an evolutionary point of view, sticking together in groups is how our species made it. It meant sharing food, protecting each other from predators, and having support. That drive to connect is baked right into our DNA. It's just as real as hunger. And if you want any more proof of how much we need to belong, just look at how we punish people. When we really want to punish someone, what do? We cut them off. We use social exclusion or ostracism. It's one of the most powerful punishments there is. A kid's timeout, an adult being sent into exile, a prisoner in solitary confinement. Being separated from the group causes real, genuine psychological pain. Okay, so we've seen these incredibly powerful forces, from basic survival needs to this complex desire for connection and how they shape everything we do. Now, let's bring it all back home and connect the dots. Let's go back to Aron Ralston one last time. That need to survive, driven by hunger and thirst, that was the foundation of his pyramid. It was absolutely essential. But it was that vision of his future son, that powerful, higher-level need to belong to a family, that is what ultimately gave him the strength to do the impossible. He harnessed both, and that's what saved his life. So, we've seen these incredible forces that are at play inside all of us every single day, pushing and pulling. And they're inside you too. Which brings us to the real question, the one that really matters. What drives you? What needs are at the bottom of your pyramid? And what great purpose, what big dream are you striving for at the very top?